Hey everyone,
Hello.
Robin Gully, your
John Justin.
Ward 2 representative, is here for your council recap,
Yep.
as always.
And I know I always say this, this will be quick. This one really will be quick.
It was a pretty quick meeting.
Yep.
Yeah. So, first of all, an open council work session. We had the 10-year forecast for our finances from Sharstar. That was great.
And some looks at sort of some conservative and less conservative ideas about what we can see for development. Even on the most conservative version, we're still trending the right direction. And as we trend this way, the levy goes this way, except that's probably it's backwards, I bet. Anyway, down levy, up development,
Right.
That's the goal, even in the, and just how much we can make that gap in the favor of lowering the levy. So that's the goal.
Then we talked a little bit about coming up with a policy for naming our city parks. We have 2 city parks and potentially 3 city parks that don't have names at this moment. So we don't know what the policy is going to be. We just had a discussion about the idea of having a policy.
Yeah. And kind of the idea that you want to have a framework so that you have a nice, consistent way to name these things, and I think we're working towards that, and, getting into the details will come as we go further on it, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Although if folks have ideas for how we should be naming city parks, now would be a really good time to send a message and just let us know your thoughts.
Yep.
We also talked about expanding the ice arena. A couple of years ago, we had an opportunity to, with the Youth Hockey Association, to consider expanding our ice arena. It would include things like getting rid of the 2 temporary trailers that they've been using as locker rooms for about 3 years, and actually building locker rooms and building a training room. Came up in 2019 and then it was delayed because of COVID, and so we talked about the real possibility of getting started on that.
And working with a lease to them where we would retain ownership, but they would have the opportunity to expand and have the usage and kind of co-running it, and really pretty well thought out monetarily. So I think it's a good plan from everything that I see. So, yeah. All right.
And then we also talked about
Public art vision and policies, and this is a very preliminary discussion, not related to specific projects, but just generally, we've been promising that we want to talk about what are we doing about public art. We went to the first step down that. Now, public art, as we defined it, I think tonight, is going to be public spaces, publicly accessible spaces. So we're not talking about putting a mural on your garage door. We're not talking about putting a mural on the exterior of a business, but, public things, schools, city parks, city facilities, things like that. We've got to nail down some details. Legally, it's complicated. Inherently, it's going to be complicated. You have to make sure you're being fair to everybody. You're not finding ways to restrict some people and let other people do it because of any preferences, which isn't our intention. But you want to make sure that those legal challenges aren't out there. So it's going to take some work from staff. Staff definitely got some direction from us on what we'd like to see, and I'm sure they're going to come back with a lot more detailed information and definitions. It's going to be related to some zoning things, with what we have some institutional zones. And again, if there's a lot of detail actually in the memo that was written up, so if you are interested in that, taking a look at that memo would help. And again, it's one of many pieces that we have to discuss. We will be discussing, I'm sure at some point, what are we doing about commercial art, but public art, the big P public art is what we're trying to figure out right now. So,
yeah, and just one thing to add to that, the big conversation that we have to, or the big thing that we always have to be mindful of is that we can't regulate content in any way.
Right.
So if we say we shouldn't, it would be a violation of the Constitution.
Yep. Big problems.
Get us into big First Amendment, into dangerous territory with the First Amendment.
Yep.
And so what we can regulate is time, place, and manner.
Yep.
So we can decide things like buildings in this zone can, potentially we can decide buildings in this zone can have murals or public art, or we can decide schools or publicly owned buildings can have art, but we're not allowed to in any way restrict the content. So we want to do it carefully and thoughtfully and
get it right the first time if at all possible, because it's a good guiding document as we move forward. And the other thing I should mention is, because I know this is often a concern, we can as a city require the level of maintenance that's required. So I know a lot of people are worried that somebody's going to put something up. Now, I don't think that most public, we certainly aren't as a city, but somebody's going to put something up and it's going to be peeling paint and all that stuff. We have an ability it's within our rights to, as a city, to say, no, it has to be maintained, it has to be kept up to a certain level of, of appearance and things like that. And we're certainly, that's also in there, and that'll be very important too.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we moved on to the council meeting. So we didn't actually have any citizen comments tonight. It was pretty quiet.
I'll do my reminder. I said it already. You've got a few more days to get in on the Annapolis survey. Please do.
Oh,
And in particular, there's the Nightmare intersection. I'm sure you all have different, more obscene names for it. There are 3 different plans. We're looking for ideas of which of those plans looks best to you. We've gotten some feedback on that in the open meetings. But I'd love for everybody to take a look at that, and if you have opinions, please share them. That's how we can figure out where to go from here.
Wait, I was also going to say, if the other thing is that we're taking applications for the Parks and Rec Committee. So if you have been thinking about ways to get involved with the city, this is a great opportunity. Please, please, please. It only takes about 5 minutes. Fill out an application for the Parks and Rec Committee.
And we're looking in particular for Ward 2 and Ward 1 residents, because we have pretty heavy representation for Ward 3. We need Ward 2 and Ward 1. So hi, Ward 2. And Ward 1, some of you are from Ward 1 and still watch this, I think. So
that's essentially anyone east of Charlton.
Yep.
Except on the very, very
with some exceptions. But hopefully you know what ward you live in. Otherwise, call me. I'll let you know.
So we had a new officer.
Yep.
New police officer tonight.
Yep. Officer Hinderscheid, who you may recognize from a previous police officer we had that just retired recently, and actually a grandfather that we did a feature on, who was a war hero, so a name that is definitely known within. The officer came back to us. He was a community service officer here, accepted a position in St. Paul, and when we opened up a position, he chose to come back to West St. Paul, which is really great because he has great ties here. So that's awesome to see.
Yeah. Definitely. We had a couple of final readings. So one was on Freestanding Solar. So I just want to go ahead and tell you all that you are welcome to build your solar. So if you want a freestanding solar,
we've got everything lined up about how that can be done and the size it can be. Which previously we just didn't have it because we hadn't. And there are not going to be a lot of reasons that people will have freestanding solar. Generally, it'll work on a roof. But if you're in a situation where you want to have solar for whatever reason, your roof is not possible, there's a mechanism now where you can examine whether it's going to be viable for you, which I think is great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We had a final reading also on a number of public hearings for conditional use permits on non-controversial
and site plans.
Site plans. Do you want to?
Yeah. So this is a planning thing generally. So the Planning Commission will look at conditional use permits, CUPs, and site plans, and a lot of times they're really non-controversial. There's nobody there that wants to speak against it. We aren't getting any input on any of that. And to make things move in a timely fashion, if there's something that just does not seem to have any indication that people are concerned about it, this way, with a single public hearing, we can put it on a consent agenda and just move it along. And sometimes that works with the deadlines of when people are building and getting bids and all that stuff. Anytime, and I can guarantee you this, anytime there's any whiff of public concern or public commentary, number one, I think the Planning Commission will recommend that it is discussed, and we can always put it on the regular council agenda. The mayor seems very invested in doing that. I certainly can speak up as the liaison. Staff will do that too. Nobody wants anything to go through and have people think, well, I didn't have a chance to speak. That's not why we're doing this at all. And also, you can always reach out, and I would encourage people, if you see something can't make it to the Planning Commission, but you have concerns, call your council people. Any of us can speak to staff and say, hey, I've got somebody who's got a question on this, can we move it to the regular agenda? The only purpose here is to make things a little more smooth when it isn't going to be an issue. It's never going to be that we don't want to hear what people have to say. So,
and just a little note on that, as it's been in the past, we've had to have 2 readings. So anyone who wants to have a conditional use permit, which is basically any kind of building where they have to ask for anything that's different from
strict zoning
regulations. They would have to come to the Planning Commission and have a reading, and then they would also have to come to the council and have a separate reading. And generally speaking, we can be pretty efficient about these things, but I mean, sometimes that can be weeks between like the planning commission meeting and the council meeting, and it can cause delays for people who are trying to get something going when it's not necessary, right? So again, we're not trying to restrict in any way people having to come in and talk about things that are controversial, but sometimes it can be as simple as like, you're required to have, your door on this side of the parking lot, and you just want to put the door on the other side of the parking lot, and it really isn't a big deal, but that's what the zoning says, and so you have to come and talk to the planning commission.
And the idea is that if we have just one meeting where people know they can go, that also can help not just the applicant, but anybody who wants to speak to it, because I know that people sometimes are confused about, well, should I go to the planning commission and talk about this, or should I wait till the city council? And this way, the planning commission is where you want to direct all of that. Obviously, like we said, we've got a stopgap if that doesn't work for you. We're not saying that. But I think there can be confusion that isn't always beneficial, where you'll have nobody show up for the planning commission, and so it smooths right through, and then it hits the council, and then people have concerns. Or vice versa, there are a ton of concerns, and then nobody shows up for the city council meeting. So if you have a single meeting that's always kind of the public point of contact, I think that helps, at least as a basic framework. So, all right.
For sure.
That was, longer than we thought, but hey,
That's all right. I think it's good.
There was, self-storage.
Self-storage,
So we are changing our current situation to where we have been allowing self-storage units in multiple places in the city, and not because it was written into the code that way, but we didn't define self-storage. We defined storage, but that was meant as a warehouse application. And I think staff's thoughts are that often if you're using your commercial area for self-storage, that's not a judgment on self-storage, but it employs very few people, and it's not often the best use for a location. And so the idea is to restrict it to the I-2, which is kind of a narrow industrial. If you look at the map, it's all kind of right down 52, which is where you normally see storage facilities, I think. And so the idea is to move that to the location where we want it, so we can free up this other area for possibly better, higher uses, as they say, which is something that is a goal of zoning, is to get better, higher uses in locations. So that was that the first reading tonight?
That was the first reading.
Yeah, so we'll see that one again, and if people have thoughts or concerns about it, you're certainly welcome to reach out. But right now we're looking at just a very narrow definition of where self-storage fits for our city, and that's why zoning exists. Zoning is so you can help. That's why the city planner is a city planner, and they do a great job. It's a complicated job, and when they see something where they think there's a best way to do something, you use zoning as a tool for that, and that's what we're trying to do right there. So.
And that was really it.
Yeah.
For the council meeting and open council work session tonight. Right. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.
Yeah, till next time. Thanks so much. Bye.